Hi all. So this week you were learning a few more things about media. So by now you have read the history of media, what is media, why do psychology and communication often work together to come up with theories that will help us understand media influence, what do we mean by media effects, and today what I'm about to present to you is what do we mean by media representation. So this class is called Representation in Media, and why is that important? Well, among other things, because we all consume media and because we are all citizens and we are all media consumers, and these ideas and this notion that we have, first of all, about who we are, but about others and about our responsibilities in this world are oftentimes informed by media. It's not just our parents that raise us, is the media that we use. And this is what we're going to learn today. So without further ado, let me just give you my presentation and get ready so that I can give you this mini lecture on media literacy. Hold on. So media literacy and representation. What is representation in media? Maria Mastronardi used this quote that I like to include in all of my media lectures or media related lectures that I give. And she said that the media we use and the stories that they tell help us to make us who we are. And this is very true. Why is media important? And again, you've been reading about this, but let me just give you one quick example, an experiment that I like to do in class. So when you see these countries, these flags, or these colors, we're talking about Venezuela, we're talking about Mexico, what is the first thing that comes to mind? And I'm going to give you an example. If I were in a classroom and this was an actual experiment, I would tell you, when you see these images, when you hear about these countries, raise your hand if the following words come to mind: technology, innovation, art. And what happens is that I don't see any hands going up. When I mention words like violence, instability, chaos, crime, all hands go up. And when I ask questions like, have you actually traveled to Venezuela? Have you actually traveled to Mexico? Do you speak Spanish? And this is important because that would mean that you are able to consume media and stories and narratives that come from these two places in particular. Do you speak the language? Most people don't. Have you visited these places? Some people may or may not end up in Mexico. Far less are in Venezuela. A lot less are in the Middle East, right? So how do you know what you know about these countries? And the answer is very simple: media. If I do a different experiment and I give you these other countries, right? Korea, Germany, France. Again, raise your hand if these words come to mind: art, technology, innovation, right? Have you visited these places? Many people haven't. Do you speak these languages? Many people don't. So again, the notions that we have about these countries come almost exclusively through media. And maybe one or two classes that we've taken in history, but that's about it. So when we're talking about media, because we often have conversations that are very binary, right? You are either completely consumed by media or you don't believe anything the media has to say, and they're both wrong. So if there's anything I want you to learn in this class is to try to avoid binaries in any kind of situation. So when it comes to media and media influence, I want you to think about your brain as if it was this box right here, right? And your brain, meaning this box, has a lot of files with different countries, right? And so you have the US, for example. Now, because you do speak English and because you do live in the US, you have a total of 300 files, out of which positive experiences are 150. Neutral experiences are 150. And negative, probably 58, right? If you're a person of color. Maybe less if you're a white person, right? When it comes to other countries like Syria, for example, how many files do you have? 50 at most? Where are these files coming from? Personal experiences? Nope. Media messages? Yes. Are these images positive? Maybe 1. Negative? 45. Neutral? 4. And that is when you begin to see the weight that media influence has on you. When you have, and this is why it is important that you open yourself to other points of views, that you surround yourself with a diverse group of people, that you allow yourself to experience different things. It's because you want your files to be larger. And that is the only way you're going to be able to counter the narratives that mainstream media has for you. Now, as a way to support what I just taught you, I'm going to give you the status of women in the US media. And this is a report that came out in 2015. Now, why am I going all the way back to 2015? And I will publish the 2019 report online for you to compare and contrast. But I think the 2015 report is actually more complete. But I also wanted to go a year before the Trump administration, because as we have learned and as we probably observed, a lot of these conversations that have to do with inequality and representation or lack of representation for many people, especially for people who don't personally experience marginalization, the conversation almost seems to start from the Trump administration. And I want to take you all the way back to 2015 so that you see that these problems are old, they're not new, right? So in this report in 2015, the first thing that I want you to notice is that back in 2015, this was the distribution of the United States when it came to adolescents. So you had in the US 49% of the population who were female adolescents, 51% who were male. The statistics don't count for trans, intersex, and non-binary individuals. So that is problem number 1, right? And when it comes to the racial diversity that you have in the US, it is calculated that in 2014, 54% of the population was white, 22% was Hispanic, 14% was Black, and then you have Asian, and then you have other races, right? The projections state that by 2050, 40% of the population will be white, 31% will be Hispanic, 13% will be Black, and you have all the other races. Now, why is this important? Because when we're talking about representation, we mean, given your demographics, how accurately are those demographics being represented in media? We have to look at the statistics if we really want to talk about representation. So this report tells you, here are the statistics that we found. When it comes to sports radio talk shows, 98% of the individuals were men and 2% were women. When it comes to news radio talk shows, 88% were men, 12% were women. When it comes to TV news employers, 58% were men, 41% were women. When it came to news directors, 69%, almost 70% were men, and 30% were women. Again, no notion, no idea of how many individuals who are trans, non-binary, or intersex are actually directors, employers, or work at a radio show. When we look at the statistics about race, we have that racial representation in newspapers was 31% white when it came to women and 55% white when it came to men. Hispanics, which is the second largest population, only 2.6% or 1.8% when it comes to women, okay? So you can start seeing how inaccurate representation is just by notion of how many people are actually represented in these professions. Now, if you go by topic, for example, and we're going to talk about gender in this class, not just about race, we're going to talk about the intersections because it's not the same thing when you're a woman and you're a white woman and when you're a woman and you're a woman of color and all of these layers, right? So when it comes to the topics that you hear in mainstream media, who's talking about US politics? 65% are men, 35% are women. Who's talking about health? Half women, half men. Who's talking about crime and justice? 67% men, 33% women. Who's talking about entertainment? 41% women, 58% men. So when it comes to the overall statistics, when we're talking about the opinions that we hear in mainstream media, the reports that we hear in mainstream media, the people that we see in mainstream media are for the most part men. When we do see women is when we have to do or we have to talk about education, health, religion, as if women had nothing to say about politics, for example, about law, about crime, and all of these things. And that's also a problem, right? Now, when it comes to the statistics by ethnicity or race, 93% of managers in news were white. And all minorities were only 22%, right? So when you start seeing, for example, movements like Oscars so white and all these things, one of the main arguments that you often hear is that, well, but if you had more diverse population, say Black movies and all these things, will they sell as much? And actually, it says here that they do. So this report also tells you not only are minorities underrepresented, but there's not a business justification for that disparity. Films with relatively diverse casts actually do get a lot of people, and we're still not seeing as much representation. Now, what's also troubling, especially for me and everybody who identifies as Latinx, is that Latino representation is almost invisible. So that is why we're seeing. Now, when it comes to show creators, because another problem that we have is not only we're not seeing minorities represented in the news, and they're not being the ones reporting the news, they're not the ones telling us what's happening, they're not the leading characters. When we do have characters of color, who's writing those characters? And the answer is also white creators. So another experiment that I did last year in this class as well was I told my students, think of your earliest memories when you found a cartoon that really spoke to you, and then tell me who wrote it. And they found that writers, directors, and producers of those cartoons were also white, even if the character was a character of color. You have Dora the Explorer, for example, and all of these things. So that's a problem that we will hopefully from this week forward will be talking about. Now, the historical comparison of race and ethnicity of female characters, and we have here all the way back to 2002 to 2014, the disparity is just enormous, right? When it comes to white versus Black versus Latino versus Asian, and indigenous people have almost no representation at all. When it comes to directors by ethnicity, same thing. All of this here right here is white men. We have white women right here. We have minority men right here. But look at the statistics of women of color. When it comes to the sexualization, and this will serve as a transition as we move forward to gore capitalism in the incoming weeks, who's sexualized in movies most of the times? So when it comes to men versus women, we all know that women get objectified and sexualized a lot more. When it comes to race and ethnicity, we find that Hispanic characters actually are sexualized the most. And growing up Latina, I can tell you two examples that I remember: Sofia Vergara, Enrique Martin. Now, it's not only that they are sexualized, which is a problem in and of itself, it's the pressure that it puts on you. So if the media is truly telling you who you are and you grow up Latina and you grow up trying to look like Sofia Vergara and you end up realizing that that's almost impossible, right? But that's pretty much all the portrayals that you see in the media. What does that say about you and your sense of adequacy or worth or value, not just representation? Now, I wish I could tell you that these numbers have changed, but I can tell you specific examples going on right now. Becky G, Maluma, right? They're sexualized all the time. So when it comes to LGBT inclusion, I told you one of the main issues with the report is that there is no space for trans identities. And earlier today, actually, I had a meeting with administrators at NAS, and we were looking at the scorecard when it comes to diversity, and we have the same problem. We don't have a way to identify non-binary, intersex, and trans individuals. And the justification is, well, the government doesn't have one. And that's justification to continue the perpetuation of invisibility. In my opinion, it's not, but this is where we are. But even when we try to have some representation, some LGBTQ representation, what are the statistics? Not surprisingly, when it comes to media, most LGBTQ characters are gay male. Most LGBTQ characters are white. So there's also a sense of erasure there, as if people of color weren't also queer sometimes, right? So when it comes to the earnings, because we know that in order for you to change these, we need money. We need money to be able to become directors. We need money to be able to stay directors. We need to be directors to direct a movie. We need to be writers to produce a movie, and all of these things. How much money are people making? People in the entertainment industry, for example. So we have here the white men are the red line that you're seeing. Women, white women, are the orange line that you're seeing. And minorities, men and women, are the green line. So when you start talking about inequality and lack of representation and gap, this is where the numbers are at back in 2015. So the bad news is that we have a long way to go. We can see here, hopefully, that representation really is lacking, that a lot of people are either underrepresented or not represented at all, right? That's the bad news. The good news is that we can get media literate, that we can be better media consumers, that we can advocate to follow more people of color on Instagram, to watch more people of color creators on Netflix, on social media, on independent platforms, to support writers who are people of color, right? So that is the good news. The good news is that we can learn about these things and then we can move forward. So media literacy, for those who didn't take Introduction to Media with me, just as a reminder, is people's understanding of what the media are, how they operate, what messages they are delivering, what roles they play in society, and how audience members respond to media messages. So if we're going to start talking about politics and gore capitalism and capitalism in general, and displacement and patriarchy and sexism and all of these things, it's because media has a role in all of these issues, either by the perpetuation of narratives or by the erasure of stories. And as media consumers, we can learn about these things. And that is what media literacy is. Now, being media literate means that you have the ability to critically understand, question, and evaluate how media works. It means that you're actually able to look at media critically and not just go for either or of those arguments that I told you in the beginning. It's not about becoming cynical and disregarding everything the media has to say. It's about paying attention. And look what's out there, and look what the media is amplifying and what the media is not amplifying. Look at the stories that get portrayed in the news versus the stories that you see on social media. So when you begin to compare and contrast, then you can start asking the right questions, and then you can become media literate. And that's why this class is important, and that's where I think our hope should be. So that is what I have for you today. I'm going to create another mini lecture so that we learn about vocabulary, which is the incoming week. And hopefully you're starting to put all the dots together and seeing what the relationship between all these weeks is. And you're learning a lot about media. So email me if you have any questions, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Bye.